We are a peaceful people. Struggle is we struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. This land is all I know. We gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow and never break. Our fathers came here and they lived and died here, and we ain't moving nowhere. Make no mistake, 'cause we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo, the time on night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. So we ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. We are a peaceful people. Struggle is we struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. This land is all I know. We gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow and never break. Our fathers came here and they lived and died here, and we ain't moving nowhere. Make no mistake, 'cause we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one courage, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo, the time on night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it. We have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not a blade of grass. So we ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. We are a peaceful people, struggle is with struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. This land is all I know, we gonna make it somehow. We will bend like a bow and never break. Our fathers came here, and they lived and died here, and we ain't moving nowhere. Make no mistake, cause we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. We love the open country of the Rupununi and the Essequibo, daytime or night. Though we may criticize it, this is our home, we love it, and we need to keep it, we have that right. So we ain't giving up no mountain, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. So we ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't giving up no river that belongs to we. Not one blue sake, not one rice grain, not one chorus, not a blade of grass. We are a peaceful people, struggle is with struggle, and we don't look for trouble, just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing down. We ain't giving up no mountains, we ain't giving up no tree, we ain't.
Honorable members, I declare this 24th sitting of the National Assembly of the 12th Parliament of the Cooperative Republic of Guyana to be duly constituted and in session. The clerk will lead us in prayers.
Almighty God, we here gathered together to most humbly beseech thee to guide us in all our consultations, so that we may together build a land where knowledge is free, where the mind is without fear, and the head is held high, and where words come from the depth of truth. Grant us, O God, the need and guidance, so that we may deal justly with the several causes that come before us, laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and personal preferences, so that the result of our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion, the preservation of justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the President, and the peace and prosperity of Guyana. Grant us, O God, the vision so to lead, that all the people of this fair land may enter that state of brotherhood and unity, where the mind is led forward by thee, with ever wide in thought and action.
Amen. Honorable members, you may be seated. Thank you.
Messages from the President. Announcements by the Speaker.
Honorable members, I just want to remind honorable members about the list of words that are deemed unparliamentary. Along with that, there is the notice that the Speaker may also disallow words that he finds unparliamentary. The other issue that we have this morning is to commend the press for the extensive coverage they've been giving and comprehensive coverage they've been giving to the sittings of the National Assembly thus far. Ms. Clerk.
Presentation of petitions, presentation of papers and reports, etc. Reports from committees, oral questions without notice, questions and notice.
Honorable members, there are two questions on today's order paper, and they are for written replies. These questions, numbers 1 and 2, are in the name of the Honorable Member, Ms. Geeta Chandan Edmond, and are for the Honorable Minister of Home Affairs. The answers to these questions have been received and have therefore, in accordance with our standing orders, been circulated.
Statements by ministers, including policy statements, personal explanations, requests for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance, motions relating to the business or sittings of the National Assembly and moved by a minister, introduction of bills, public business, government's business.
Honorable members, before I call the first speaker today, I just want to inform members that the business subcommittee met on Friday and have decided on the schedule for the estimates. We will move that resolution around lunchtime. Our first speaker today is the Honorable Member, Mr. Roysdale Ford, Senior Counsel. The Honorable Member, please, you may proceed.
Good morning, Mr. Speaker. Morning,
Good morning.
members of the National Assembly. Mr. Speaker, I rise to strongly reject, oppose, and denounce the 2021 estimates and expenditure. The budget presentation delivered by the Senior Minister in the Office of the President with responsibility for finance, entitled, I quote, "A Path to Recovery, Economic Dynamism and Resilience," apart from being historic for the length of time it took to read, approximately 5 hours, it is also historic because it is the budget with the largest deficit in the history of Guyana, a budget in the excess of $106.651 billion. Mr. Speaker, the senior minister has stated that the economy grew a whopping 43.5% in 2020. This, Mr. Speaker, is a testimony to the management of this economy of this country and the policies introduced by the Partnership for National Unity and the Alliance for Change. This economic growth delivered to the people of this country by the APNU AFC offers to them the hope and expectation of an equitable economic and social transformation of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, this is the greatest failure of this budget. It fails to offer any genuine prospects of any equitable economic and social transformation of Guyana, which is so needed and desired by the people of Guyana. This failure renders Budget 2021 irrational, insipid, and insensitive. In this sense, Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is ordinary, flat, and unimaginative. It is therefore the classic orthodox budget that the people of this country would come to expect from a People's Progressive Party administration. I would position Budget 2021 by setting at its context Budget 2011. Budget 2011 was a budget of the People's Progressive Party and delivered by the Honorable Ashley Singh. In 2021, this country is again saddled by the People's Progressive Party Civic and the Honorable Ashley Singh. Mr. Speaker, in a column on the 2011 budget, Kaitour News, after reviewing that budget, stated, and I quote, "The 2011 budget is said to be the highest in our country's history. But if you break down the numbers and you add what it will cost the Treasury to increase pensions and social assistance and place this alongside what is being spent on public expenditure, the distinction becomes more clearing and reveals the anti-working class nature of this year's budget." End of quote. It also stated, so where is the benefit for the working class in this budget? The answer, we will be told during the debate, will be in the billions that are going to be spent on education and health. But the rich will also benefit from this, will they not? End of quote. And it stated also, Mr. Speaker, and I quote, "The philosophy of the PPP government is that by helping the rich, we help the poor. The rich create the jobs and keep the industry and commerce going, thus helping the poor." End of quote. Mr. Speaker, this budget, Budget 2021, is a mere continuation of the same trickle-down approach to the economic management of Guyana by the People's Progressive Party Civic. Mr. Speaker, a budget is a monetary reflection of all government policies. It is a document that relates not only to the Minister of Finance, but ultimately to those in government who would implement and prioritize the policies it encapsulates. The agenda laid out in Budget 2021 is quite instructive and revealing of what are the People's Progressive Party's priorities for the next year. When one looks at what were the priorities of the private sector and the Guyana Trade Unions Congress for Budget 2021, and what eventually found its way into Budget 2021, the trickle-down approach is confirmed. The Guyana Trade Unions Congress stated that its priorities were: 1, a reduction in national borrowing. Was it granted? No. A reduction in concessions given to the private sector. Was it granted? No. The erasure of the deficit of the National Insurance Scheme. Was it granted? No. The immediate restoration of the constitutional right to free education at the tertiary level. Was it granted? No. On the other hand, all the requests made by the private sector were granted. Mr. Speaker, the senior minister at paragraph 1.15 of Budget 2021 spoke about the budget being one to ensure that the country recovers from the trauma of the last 5 years. You see, Mr. Speaker, when I said that the budget is irrational and insipid, I was not being harsh. For the benefit of the senior minister, who we know from the debate to increase the debt ceilings a few weeks ago, engages in imaginary conversations with himself, let me bring him up to speed with a dose of reality. Whilst he was sojourning for the past 5 years, the economy has grown and flourished. In relation to the productive industries, only the sugar industry contracted in the past 4 years due to the very mismanagement of the sugar industry by the PPPC, a crisis which was inherited by the Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change. The other productive industries expanded on an average in the past 5 years. There was notable growth in other crops, gold, other mining and quarrying, petroleum and gas, and support services, rice manufacturing, electricity supply, accommodation and food services, financial and insurance activities, professional, scientific, and technical services, human health, and social work. These expanded on the average in the past 5 years by 5.5%, 12.7%, 14.9%, 119.4%, 6%, 4.2%, 4.5%, 4%, 4.1%, and 4.9% respectively. Further, the respective real gross domestic product for each industry from 2004 to 2019 increased except for the sugar, forestry, and rice industries, which contracted a mere 0.1%, and sugar manufacturing. Noteworthy are the industries which recorded significant growth over the period 2014 to 2019. These include other crops, livestock, gold, other mining and quarrying, petroleum and gas and support services, rice manufacturing, electricity supply, water supply and storage, transport and storage, accommodation and food services, financial and insurance activities, professional, scientific, and technical services, administrative and support services, public administration, human health, and social work. These increased, Mr. Speaker, by 28.6%, 15.4%, 63.8%, 72.7%, 3,679%, 19.8%, 22.8%, 17.4%, 17.9%, 24.5%, 21.6%, 22.4%, 18.9%, 17.7%, and 26.8% respectively. This could hardly be called a case for recovery from trauma. I know that the phenomenal growth and transformation of the economy would have been traumatic for the senior minister, who had been coming to this parliament for many years with all sorts of brews, devices, and contraptions, but just could not get the economy to perform. You see, Mr. Speaker, the APNU AFC believes in empowering economics and people-up economics. Mr. Speaker, the rate of positive growth of the economy that the senior minister and his government is traumatized about was achieved by empowering economics and people-up economics. It was not the PPP trickle-down economics that led to increases in wages and salaries, old age pensions, and social assistance. It was not the same old PPP trickle-down economics which resulted in significant growth in the public sector minimum wage. These increases led to higher household income, particularly among those earning within the lowest income brackets, thereby reducing poverty. The public sector minimum wage, Mr. Speaker, increased by over 70% between 2015 and 2019 to reach $70,000. In addition, the expenditure on old age pensions and social assistance increased by 26.4% in 2019 when compared with 2016, reaching $14.8 billion. Between 2015 and 2019, old age pensions increased by 52.6% to meet $20,500. Mr. Speaker, the former Minister of Finance, Mr. Jordan's prudent and sound management has to be acknowledged, especially now as we stand to lose all the gains the economy made over the last 5 years at the hands of this illegitimate government with a blast from the past with the return of the failed...
Honorable Mr. Ford, you said illegitimate government. Do you have any proof of that?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, I have proof.
Oh, well,
if you wish me to withdraw it, I will withdraw it for the purposes of your proceedings.
Please.
With a blast from the past, with the return of the failed policies, whereby the rich get richer and the poor stay poorer. Mr. Speaker, let us examine the management of the economy under the last 5 years of the Jagdeo presidency. Let us examine the poor handling of the economy in his first 5 years as elected president and compare that to the performance of the economy under the first 5 years of the APNU AFC. You will recall, Mr. Speaker, that the Honorable Member Jagdeo, appointed in 1999, had 2 years to practice as president before he was elected in 2001. Despite having 2 years to practice as president before being elected and having served as finance minister before that, he could not deliver credible economic performance. Then came the flood in 2005, a complete mismanagement of the drainage and irrigation infrastructure. The Honorable Member Jagdeo's first 5 years was a complete disaster, in contrast to the Granger administration, which grew the economy 3 times faster than the Jagdeo administration ever did. Mr. Speaker, in the year 2001, the economy grew 1.9%. In 2002, it grew 1.1%. In 2003, minus 0.6%. In 2004, 1.6%. In relation to the Granger administration, in 2015, it grew 3.2%. In 2016, 3.3%. In 2017, 2.1%. In 2018, 4.1%. The coalition spending, Mr. Speaker, produced results. It produced results. When the Honorable Member Jagdeo inherited the economy from the Jagans, 31% of the GDP was in productive capacity according to the World Bank data. By the time the Granger administration came to power, Guyana productive capacity was below 25%. In other words, Mr. Speaker, the people of Guyana could only use 25% of the GDP to invest instead of 31%. During those very hard times, the Honorable Member Jagdeo and the PPP introduced VAT. Now they're pretending that they're protesting against VAT and taxes. Hypocrites, Mr. Speaker, of the highest order. The coalition came to power in 2015 and reduced VAT from Jagdeo's 16% to 14% and stabilized the economy. By reducing the rate of VAT, Mr. Speaker, the coalition was able to raise the productive capacity of the country to over 31% again by 2018. This is what the World Bank said. Mr. Speaker, the coalition has increased the opportunity for interested persons to position themselves to take advantage of the opportunities that have emerged from the oil and gas economy. In other words, it was laying the foundation for all Guyanese, not some, as the PPP is now doing. All Guyanese would benefit from the oil and gas economy. Mr. Speaker, the PPP seeks to claim that the coalition did not see agriculture as a priority. Rice output in 2018 was no worse than any time between 2009 and 2014 during the reign of the PPPC. In fact, it was better during that time than any other period. Let us examine the agricultural output of commodities over the last few years. Again and again, Mr. Speaker, it establishes that there was greater economic growth under the coalition. Cassava output was down 67% under the PPPC. It was up 156% under the coalition. Citrus production was down 57% under the PPPC. It was up 193% under the coalition. Banana was down 22%. It was under the PPPC. It was up 144% under the coalition. Even where the PPPC, Mr. Speaker, was able to increase output, the coalition had performed it. Under the coalition, egg production increased 494%. Under the coalition, borer production increased over 600%. Hot pepper cultivation increased nearly 700%. Under the Granger administration, the Granger government, tomato increased 857%. Mr. Speaker, the PPP is about distorting the facts, misleading the people of this country about agriculture and the economy. Pineapple production went up under the coalition by over 1,000%. Plantain production under the coalition increased over 3,000%. In other words, the performance of the economy with respect to pineapples and plantains alone was over 10 times more than under the PPPC. Borer production and citrus production went up over 7 times more than under the PPPC. These agricultural commodities together contribute more than rice and sugar as agricultural crops to our economy. This is what the ordinary man and woman were able to achieve under our government. So the PPPC can talk all it wants because it cannot dispute the fact that the Granger government cared more about the hard-working Guyanese people and their economic future. The PPP cannot discourage the Guyanese people from believing in themselves and from us believing in them. The coalition government has been a government that was sensitive to the concerns and business interests. And it is on the return to government and on its return will continue to be sensitive to the concerns of the people and businesses. In 2015, Mr. Speaker, if you were a worker and earned $50,000 per month, you were able to keep $600,000 a year in your pocket. Because of our government's concern for workers and the importance of families, workers were able to keep all the money they earned, up to $780,000 per year, in their pockets for those 4 years. That is $180,000 extra that the workers were able to keep in their pockets. When you divide that by 4, Mr. Speaker, it means that who earned $780,000 or more got an extra $45,000 in their pockets every year. Under the coalition, it paid to work, and we encourage work. In fact, Guyanese workers were able to keep an additional $46 billion in their pocket under our government. Mr. Speaker, the government intends to go borrowing to fund the deficit. But up to now, the senior minister has not told us how much of the budget will be financed by loans. Mr. Speaker, for the 5 years of the APTU AFC in government, the total deficit for those years was about $92 billion. Last year, the budget deficit for the PPPC was $92 billion. And this year, over $106 billion. So the program, Mr. Speaker, is to borrow and spend, borrow and spend. Mr. Speaker, the senior minister repeatedly came to the country speaking of the largest budget ever, the largest budget ever. I refer to 2011. In 2012, the senior minister was back at it again with the largest budget ever. Under his stewardship as the Minister of Finance between 2009 to 2012, Guyana's interest payment to bankers who held over domestic and external debts increased from $30 million to $40 million per year. Mr. Speaker, this represented a decision by the senior minister to transfer wealth and income from the workers of this country. It was only under the APTU FC that workers of this country began to receive any real and genuine benefits from the government. Mr. Speaker, with the increases in the debt ceiling for both external and domestic borrowing, the same approach is being employed again. Mr. Speaker, the heavy debt burden which is being placed on the workers and the people of this country will stuff out this fiscal space for benefits to the workers of the country. The PPPC has no concern about the workers. The late President Chedi Jagan, in his 1980 budget presentation, stated, and I quote, Mr. Speaker, I quote, "Debt financing will continue to plague the working people, and this country will sink deeper and deeper into the mire of despondency and despair." But they won't even listen to their own founder leader, Mr. Speaker. The state of despondency and despair which existed under the PPPC is already fermenting and is on its rise. Mr. Speaker, when you listen to the budget speech of the senior minister on sugar, you wonder if he's still jet lagged. Mr. Speaker, it was under the tenure of the senior minister as the then Minister of Finance that under the People Progressive Party Civic that sugar suffered its worst and was left to die. The senior minister in 2009 stated that sugar declined by 24.1% in 2005 and 15.8% in 2008 when compared with 2007. Mr. Speaker, after the PPPC allowed the sugar industry to go into free fall, after closing estates, their response was a scaled-down sugar factory. This was supposed to be the silver bullet, but it was to boost the sugar production. But, Mr. Speaker, it turned out to be the bane of its existence. The sugar industry was brought, the scaled-down sugar factory was brought to this country by this senior minister. The senior minister entered into loans for scaled-down sugar factory, saddling the workers of this country with over $3,800,000 per year in debt, with a repayment period ending in 2033. They spent billions of dollars to erect a factory that was faulty, poorly designed and constructed. This is the legacy of the senior minister and the PPPC in relation to sugar. But you will notice, Mr. Speaker, that in the budget pages, the 77 pages of this work of fiction, which is this year's budget, the senior minister has not mentioned one word of the scaled-down sugar factory. I know, Mr. Speaker, you have the exercise and you have the prerogative to exercise a fact-checking role on the budget speech. But I know that you cannot contradict me. There's nothing in the budget about the scaled-down sugar factory and the over $200 million wasted by the PPPC on pages 26 to 28. Is this the second phase? Let me quote, is this, quote, the second phase from the 1992 to 2015 period, end of quote, where the senior minister refers to paragraph 1.6 budget of the budget, and I quote, as an era of economic restoration and reconstruction with widespread renewal and expansion, return to our country to insolvency and creditworthiness, and put it firmly on a path of prosperity? That's a joke. The reality, Mr. Speaker, is that the senior minister and the PPPC have been bad for Guyana. The truth is, Mr. Speaker, that the senior minister is orbiting in his own universe. The facts are that between 1998 and 2008, The economy grew under the PPPC by 1.8%, and in the years 1998, 2000, and 2003, the economy contracted. Mr. Speaker, this budget has abandoned not only the public servants, the teachers, the policemen, and soldiers and nurses, but the employees of the private sector. You see, Mr. Speaker, the PPP's philosophy is that workers must work and preferably be seen and not heard. That is why the voice of workers and labor cannot and did not adorn the pages of this budget. Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Labor, the honorable member, cannot be taken seriously. The Minister of Labor, the senior minister, and this government have failed the employees in the private sector. In August 2020, the Minister of Labor announced that he would be reinitiating negotiations for the private sector minimum wages to be increased to $60,000. Mr. Speaker, it was the APNU AFC that increased private sector wages in 2017 from $202 to $255, which took the monthly salary from $35,000 to $44,000. Let him laugh, he's a joker. Mr. Speaker, the increases in salaries for workers...
Who is him?
Pardon me?
Him.
Who is him?
Who was him?
The honorable member.
Right, and there were about 2 other times when, again, the Minister of Labor, please, either use comrade or honorable, right?
Oh, the honorable member has a joke on him. Mr. Speaker, the increases in salaries for workers, whether private or in public sector, is not a priority for this government. The government simply does not care about the workers. They're totally insensitive. There's no increase in salaries for the soldiers, no increase in salaries for the police, no increase in salaries for the public servants, none for the nurses, none for the teachers. The Minister of Labor has not said a word about this, and we can't expect more from him. He has no point to make. The budget speech is also silent on the National Insurance Scheme. This is not surprising, but it's definitely alarming. The National Insurance Scheme is an important institution for the ordinary Guyanese worker. As I pointed out earlier, the Guyana Trade Unions Congress specifically requested that careful attention be paid to the scheme. The senior minister was the chairman of the Cooperative Finance Administration, which had to approve investments made by the NIS, and did approve the investment of $6 billion in the CLICO company, the Colonial Life Insurance Company. The National Insurance Scheme is now of little importance. It is now of low priority and of little use to the PPC, Mr. Speaker. You see, while the senior minister was the Minister of Finance and had the responsibility for the National Insurance Scheme, he permitted and allowed the plunder of the scheme. The investment failed, leaving the beneficiaries of NIS suffering terribly. It was the Partnership for National Unity and Alliance for Change in September 2016 that signed a debenture agreement of over $5.6 billion to repay the NIS for the losses suffered when the monies were given to CLICO, when it collapsed in 2009 under the senior minister. The further work which would have been undertaken by the APNU-FC to fix the scheme has not been considered a priority by the senior minister and by his party. The workers are simply not a priority, but the use of the savings to invest in the Barbies River Bridge Company, where the scheme does not even have a director, was a priority for the PPPC. The senior ministers paid no attention to the National Insurance Scheme. He never had an interest apart from using the money as a gift for associates to invest. Completely overlooked in the budget speech is the need for comprehensive citizenship, immigration, and border policy. We heard the Labour Minister again wailing about Labour officers learning foreign languages. The same guy from last year, nothing of substance. Mr. Speaker, the budget speech has no substance on the issues of constitutional reform and governance. It is clear that there is no commitment to constitutional reform. With respect to the criminal justice system, no meaningful progress has been taken by the People's Progressive Party. Despite the grand talk of an active and rigorous parliamentary agenda, there's been no progress of sign of any activity or rigor. Under the criminal justice sector reform, guidelines, rules, and programs for the implementation of the restorative justice program had already been developed. Further, the Restorative Justice Bill of 2009 had already been laid in this House. There's not a single piece of legislation which has been identified in the budget speech which would advance or improve the justice sector. All the bills brought to this House, except the unconstitutional Fiscal Management and Accountability Amendment Act, were bills drafted and conceived under the APNU AFC. The budget and the Attorney General once again failed to appreciate that there's a need for the establishment of a governance structure that recognizes the reality of our ethnic composition, the devolution of powers to the region, and the review and strengthening of the checks and balances in the constitutional framework. Mr. Speaker, I would not have known last year when I spoke of the PPPC's decision to dissolve the State Assets Recovery Agency and to replace it with a watch poodle, that poodle would have been the Honorable Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, the Honorable Attorney General has launched a vicious attack on supporters of the APNU AFC seeking to recover lands. Despite this speak of oneness, this is hypocrisy. Since the attention of the Attorney General has been directed to assets of Guyana, and he has a keen interest in the assets of Guyana, I wish to draw his attention to certain facts. On January 12, 2010, NISL entered into an amendment to an agreement of sale and purchase with National Hardware signed on December 28, 2008 to sell property measuring 103.3 acres for consideration in excess of $598 million. The price per acre sold to National Hardware, $5.8 million, was substantially less than what National Hardware had bid for similar property, approximately 40 acres in 2009 in the same Liliendal Patterson area, and where the highest bid received in January 2009 was $16.24 million per acre. And that price appeared inadequate to NISL at the time it was rejected. Also, NISL received an opportunity of $1 million per acre for the said land when the property was advertised for expressions of interest in mid-2008. On the 12th of March 2010, vesting order number 4 of 2010 was signed by now the senior minister, vesting the ownership from the government of Guyana via Lands and Surveyors Commission to NISL. On the 20th of March 2010, that very order was published in the official gazette. On the 16th of March 2010, NISL wrote Eddie Boyer, informing him that the 103 acres of land which was vested to National Hardware and asking him to pay the balance of $540 million. On June 1, 2010, NISL wrote Mr. Boyer, requesting that the outstanding balance of $540 million due since March 16, 2010 was outstanding and that the interest was accruing until paid. He did pay the balance, Mr. Speaker, between October 29, 2010 and 1st of December 2010. On May 9, 2011, the transport for the property was issued to National Hardware. And this is the kicker now, Mr. Speaker. In 2012, National Hardware sold Edward B. Bihari and Company 16.615 acres out of that 103 acres for $495,085,000. Imagine 16.615 acres of land being sold for 495 odd million. That same 16.6 acres forming part of a 100-acre plot that was sold for 598 million. While officials of and appointed by the APNU AFC are being untreated fairly and harassed, the country awaits the investigation of this matter and the institution of legal proceedings. Mr. Speaker, I take this opportunity to remind this House that the party, our party, my party, during its time in government, governed Guyana differently from the way it was governed 23 years prior to our assumption of office. Everyone is well aware, even though we knew who was on the PPPC's nomination list in 2015 and who were avowed supporters of the PPPC, our government engaged in political neutrality. We did so by refusing to politicize the human resources of this country, unlike what is taking place once again under the PPPC administration. Under the coalition government, Guyanese were able to disclose their party affiliation without fear of dismissal. Guyanese were able to exercise the freedom of speech and association without fear of reprisal during the administration of the coalition. Even as the legitimacy of this government remains under a cloud, we have already seen the vindictiveness and vengeful conduct of the PPPC re-emerge as it has gone about satisfying political patronage.
Honorable
It has
member,
all.
we have seen the expiration of your first segment. You need an extension to continue.
Comrade Speaker, I do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude his whipping.
Honorable member, I don't know about whipping, but you have 5 minutes to continue to conclude your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, Mr. Speaker, PPP has already returned to the window dressing, the standard version of PPPC inclusion. Our philosophy in governing was different. It was one of tolerance and compromise, in contrast to the spitefulness currently on full display in public. I wish to recall the efforts of my party to align the practice of good governance with the freedoms that the Guyanese expect their government to permit them to have. We believe that the Guyanese people have a right to be free of excessive government domination and control, unjustified imprisonment, and wanton police misconduct. Perhaps Guyanese were surprised by the amount of freedom they were able to enjoy without political reprisal under our administration and a political force and a police force that was becoming better at providing service instead of demanding bribes. Regrettably, in the early days of taking office, we see the return of the ugly head of police brutality and misconduct, what I guess can now be called the signature profile of the PPPC. Further, during our term of office, we sought to leave the people of this country with a greater amount of income that they had earned, and they exercised their choice over how to spend it. In doing so, we took the route of reducing the income tax burden on the people of this country. A few in the private sector would have probably felt we had not done enough. In a quite misleading fashion, Budget 2021 can be interpreted to mean state domination and economic degeneration. Our mandate, though, was to rebuild and restore the trust in the institutions of government. Equally important was the task of giving the people a minimum wage. Towards that end, we increased the minimum wage by over 26%, and the salaries of public servants who earn $100,000 and less by an average of 17.1%. That significant salary increase was accompanied by the inclusion of NIS as a tax deduction. Through that process alone, every eligible taxpayer automatically had an increase in their salaries of about 2%. Added to that, Mr. Speaker, in 2016, we increased the exemption threshold to $660,000, bringing further relief to Guyanese and giving them control over their additional income. With putting Guyanese in control of their lives, there was a mission before they increased it to $720,000 in 2017 and reduced the income tax rate from 30 to 28%. Mr. Speaker, all of these steps were taken on a commitment to leave the Guyanese people in control of their destiny and to use their own money as they wish, creatively as they wish. How Guyanese spend their money must always be their choice, even as they join in contributing in the common services to the government. The disposition of my party is unlike that of the PPPCs, whose theme and principle undergirding this 2021 budget continues to veer away from the charge given to us by the Constitution of Guyana that we must complement our economic independence with political sovereignty. Mr. Speaker, this budget wants Guyanese to continue believing that the PPP knows best and must tell them how to live their lives. They must retain for themselves in this budget the right to give and the right to take. By the illegal legislation of this government, the coalition did not get a chance to continue the process of reducing the direct tax burden on Guyanese. This budget did not do it either. But our commitment to free the people of this country from excessive dependence on the government is firm and resolute. I therefore want to inform this House and the people of Guyana that it is the intention of our party, along with the coalition partners, to remove income tax from the tax structure of Guyana. Guyana has the capacity to do so, and Guyanese have the right to expect it to happen. This step to free the people from the clutches of the Guyanese government and to give Guyanese control over their income will happen. It will also give them the opportunity to enjoy a quality of life consistent with their work and the possibilities of the country resources as called for in the Constitution. The people of this country will stop paying income tax, and they will not be afraid of political bullying, administrative unfairness, and arrogance as they seek to build wealth and make a positive contribution to our dear land. That is our commitment to Guyana. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2021 is a colossal failure. The PPPC once again has failed to grapple with the social economic inequalities that exist and which will be exacerbated by the substantial projected growth over this year and other years. They have once again chosen to abandon the people of Guyana, all the people, including the poor people of Guyana. And the APNUFC will forever stand in the defense of the vulnerable, poor, and underprivileged people of Guyana. I thank you, Mrs. Speaker.
Thank you very much, Honorable Member. It is my honor now to call on the Honorable Member and Minister of Health, the Honorable Member, Dr. Frank Anthony.
Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, allow me first of all to join my colleagues on this side of the House to congratulate Dr. Ashni Singh and the Ministry of Finance team for putting together a balanced budget. This budget takes into consideration the need to repair the damage done by APNU-AFC by unshackling the poor from the unconscionable taxes, by restoring and expanding jobs, and laying the blueprint for prosperity in this country. Mr. Speaker, the people are relieved that the economy is back in safe hands, that the budget represents their interests, that they were consulted, and that their views were incorporated, and because of this, that they have more monies now in their pockets for themselves and their family. Mr. Speaker, we just heard an excursion into fiction. We heard from the honorable member who came before us just now that somehow that we heard cassava was increased by 1,000%, and banana and bora and plantain and pineapple. And somehow these increases, while laudable as they are, somehow they would replace our export earning in sugar and rice. How much cassava did we export? How much money did we earn? How much pineapple did we export? And how much did we earn? When you come here and you try to tell us about agriculture, your record in agriculture is disgraceful. And every single farmer in this country knows that. So don't come here and lecture us. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about agriculture a little bit. What have they done with the infrastructure in agriculture? What have they done with the DNI of this country? They have increased the charges on farmers. They took it up to $15,000 per acre, when under the PPP it was $3,500. And because of that, farmers were leaving the lands in droves. Mr. Speaker, what about VAT on agriculture? What about VAT on agriculture? Let's talk about it. 14% VAT on agricultural inputs. That is what they impose. And you know what that caused? That caused simple farmers not to be able to have the inputs to be able to do proper agriculture. Imagine, Mr. Speaker, they put VAT on spray can so that the farmers could not have or paid more for spray cans. And what about the markets for these agricultural produce? Where are the markets? Under the APNU AFC, they had no markets for the farmers, causing whatever they produce, in many cases, to spoil. Mr. Speaker, I had the opportunity of going in Region 9, and when I visited some of those villages, the peanut farmers could not have access to market. Now, under this government, Region 9 farmers can have access to market. What about agro-processing? We left a beautiful, functioning agro-processing facility at Parika, state of the art. What did they do with it? Over the last couple of years, they have abandoned that facility. And that is why we are going to restore that. And not only that, we are going to be building more agro-processing facility for our farmers in Region 3, Region 9, Region 10, and Region 6. Mr. Speaker, in every sector we can look at what they have done. They have destroyed almost every sector of our country. And they come here.
Minister, I just want to understand who they are.
The honorable member on that side, the APNU AFC, they have destroyed almost all sectors of our economy. And they come here today to lecture us. Mr. Speaker, gone are the years when with every passing APNU AFC budget, anxiety turned into nightmares as working families were buried deeper under taxes and thousands of jobs were destroyed. And let them say they didn't destroy jobs. Look at what happened in sugar. More than 7,000 jobs, more than 7,000 families they retrenched. And that had an indirect impact on many communities across this country. And then let's look at the other sector. Under their watch, they lost more than 33,000 jobs. And that is a report from their own Ministry of Labor. And there was a sense of hopelessness that pervaded this land. Mr. Speaker, what this budget is trying to do is to right the wrongs against the poor of our country by creating job opportunities, by removing VAT on essential food items, by restoring dignity and giving everyone a fair shot at prosperity. Mr. Speaker, this is not empty rhetoric. Ask the sugar workers, ask the construction workers, ask the small business owners, ask the mining workers, ask the public servants, ask the police and the army, ask the elderly, and ask the working families of this country. Every family in this country today, Mr. Speaker, is happy with the restoration and the increase of the cash grant of $15,000 per child. Every household is satisfied with the COVID-19 cash grants of $25,000. What did they do for the people? They were there. Why is it that they couldn't give them a cash grant for COVID? Mr. Speaker, in this country today, there's a feeling of optimism. There's a renewed sense of confidence. And Mr. Speaker, everybody is talking that Guyana is back on track. Mr. Speaker, despite their toxic bombast, the persons on the other side, the honorable members, Even these honorable members, they know that this is an excellent budget with the right balance of social expenditures and fiscal measures, and this mix is going to make a bigger pie for all Guyana. Perhaps that is why, Mr. Speaker, there were no arguments on the macro or even the micro economic measures. There was no views on the economic fundamentals of this budget, and there weren't any ideas on the budget measures. Instead, the honorable members were very comfortable taking refuge in dishonorable, distasteful, racist rants. I heard one honorable member refer to another honorable member as an Uncle Tom, and there were many others that litter this debate. Mr. Speaker, this speaks volumes about the person that is making the attacks, and speak even more about the racist nature of the organization that they represent. I hope that when the honorable leader of the opposition rises to make his contribution, that he rebukes his offending comrades, condemns in the strongest terms this racist tirade, and offer an apology to the members of this House and the Guyanese people as a whole. Mr. Speaker, this type of backward thinking has no place in a forward-looking Guyana. Michelle Obama once said, when someone is cruel or acts like a bully, you don't stoop to their level. No, our motto is when they go low, we go high. Throughout this
Honorable
debate,
Member, Ms. MacDonald, certain words you're using, Mr. Mahipal and your colleague, the Honorable Member, when you shout, you're right in my ear. Continue, Honorable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout this debate, we have taken the high ground, highlighting policies, plans, and the pathways to prosperity. In contrast, our opponents have valiantly tried to distract attention away from the pro-people, pro-business measures in this budget. This ostrich-like behavior of burying your heads in the sand so that you are blinded to the obvious is a hallmark of sore losers. Look up. Look around you. The country has moved on. The people are moving on. Many of them feel betrayed by their leaders, false narratives, the ugly attempts to subvert the Constitution, the bizarre attempts to mingle the elections. The Honorable Member Roysdale Ford was part of that star-studded cast of lawyers who desperately tried every trick in the book to thwart the will of the Guyanese people. The people of this country, Mr. Speaker, will never forget the Honorable Member and his colleagues' handiwork to stop the legitimately passed no-confidence motion. They knew that the no-confidence motion was passed with a legal majority, and they said so in the Parliament. Yet he joined in arguing all the way to the CCJ to stop the effect of the no-confidence motion using convoluted mathematics. Mr. Speaker, the people of this country will never forget the honorable member defense of one Clement Mingo, who sought to alter the statements of poll.
Honorable Minister, there is a standing order with respect to naming people who can't defend themselves in the House, so please.
Mr. Speaker, the honorable member defended the Prince of Ashman's building, who sought to alter the statements of poll. Mr. Speaker, the people of this country would never forget the honorable member and his colleagues' support for, I don't know if to call his name now, the one who arbitrarily threw out tens of thousands of votes so that he could change the winner of the March 2nd election. And we all know who he is because he submitted many reports. What you call it? Exactly. Mr. Speaker, the people of this country would never forget the honorable member's strident call for a total forensic count to determine the election's final results. Yet he then turned around after the recount results showed that the PPP won the elections and challenged these results in court. Mr. Speaker, how can the people of this country forget the honorable member and his colleagues after he was instrumental in delaying the legitimate government from taking office for more than 5 months? These are the same honorable members who came to this parliament, and I heard in his opening statement, he said he reject, he oppose, and he renounce this budget. What can this honorable member come to this parliament after all that he has done with these election petitions and all kinds of things to challenge the legitimacy of budget 2021? Mr. Speaker, the Guyanese people are smart, they're resilient, and they're strong. And even those who voted for APNU AFC realized that they were taken for a ride. Many of your supporters listen with amazement at the flip-flopping and the inconsistencies. And many of them concluded that you lost the elections when you refused to produce your SOPs. Not only have you lost the elections, you have now lost credibility. People don't believe you. People don't trust you. People are ashamed of you. That is why people are keeping their social distance from you. The trick that you once pulled of using ethnic mobilization to sustain support is changing. Guyanese no longer want to live in ethnic enclaves. They are tired of hearing you single out one group over another. And I know many of you are gifted with words. You can dress up your racism in nice flowery language. But when we strip the fanciness away, it is pure ethnic hustle. This must stop. Mr. Speaker, on the eve of the election anniversary, I want to say that the Guyanese people have moved on. They want the APNU AFC to accept the results of the elections and move on. They want us to erase the lines of division. They want us to have more unity and cooperation. We must work to make that wish a reality. We must actively work and continuously promote the many things that can help make Guyana and knit Guyana into that diverse tapestry. Our people will always be at their best when we rise above division and ethnic cleavages. When our brothers and sisters can come together for a common purpose to proclaim the creed in our motto of one people, one nation, with one destiny. Mr. Speaker, our President, His Excellency Mohammed Irfan Ali, understands the value of unity and the cost of division. That is why he created the One Guyana Commission to bring our people together. Whether we are big or small, whether we are black or brown, government or opposition, there is an opportunity for everyone. This is a vision of hope, of oneness, of a new Guyana that we are building. We need every Guyanese talents and efforts in rebuilding and creating new levels of prosperity. We need them in every sector of our country. Mr. Speaker, in health, we are still battling with many challenges in this sector. And this includes drug shortages, lack of adequate infrastructure, lack of ambulances. These problems are systemic, and while some progress has been made, it would require a lot more work to permanently correct the deficiencies and the damage done by the APNU and AFC. In terms of drug shortages, we have inherited a messy situation where drugs and medical supplies were not purchased since 2018, and more than $1 billion worth of drugs in the bond had expired. We had to dump this. We had to start to address this shortage by doing emergency procurement to fill the immediate needs. And we are hopeful that with this year's allocation of more than $7 billion, that we will stabilize this situation. Mr. Speaker, APNU AFC left us with many incomplete infrastructural projects. The most famous is the infectious disease hospital, where they spent $1 billion. Yet, it was inoperable. Our government had to fix all the deficiencies, buy all the equipment, and find the staff to run the facility. We had to make it operable. And Mr. Speaker, despite all of those challenges, we were able to start the services at that facility on the 1st of September 2020. And to date, Mr. Speaker, we have treated close to 700 patients in that facility. Mr. Speaker, there are many other incomplete projects, including the Rijnveld Polyclinic and the Ministry of Health head office. The Honorable Dr. Cummins said that she would be monitoring in her speech earlier in this debate. And it begs the question of why did she not monitor before? Because the projects are substantially delayed and above budget. Mr. Speaker, let's just look at the Ministry of Health headquarters. This is a clear case of mismanagement and, if not possible, corruption. This project, which was started in 2017 at the cost of 365 million and was to be completed in 365 days, is still not finished. The contractor was paid 304 million, which represented 85% of the contract sum. And of that sum that was paid, 233 million was paid without any valuation certificates. To complete this project now, Mr. Speaker, we will have to plan things, do internal and external painting, installation of a lift, build some stairs, tiling, plumbing, and electrical works. Yet, 85% of the money has already been expended. The contractor, Mr. Speaker, has since been terminated, and a new tender for a contractor to finish the job will shortly...
The contractor has been terminated?
The contract has been terminated, sorry. And we have advertised, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, APNU AFC were also in the habit of announcing infrastructural projects and don't follow through, budget after budget. And here is a clear example. Since 2016, the APNU AFC spoke about the primary healthcare project, and every year since then, they have made a token allocation in the budget, but the project never materialized. In 2017, there was nothing. 2018, nothing. 2019, nothing. In 2020, when we returned to office, we realized that no work was done on this project for all these years. And within months, Mr. Speaker, we were able to restart the negotiations with the Exim Bank of India. Tenders were advertised, firms were allowed to bid, and they were evaluated. And the recommendation was made for a company to do the designs of the West Demerara Hospital, the Saudi Hospital, and the Bartika Hospital. Those design works would start in a few months, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, when they were in office, and I mean the APNU AFC, many of the governments did not trust them with the money because the Smart Hospital Project, a UK government initiative, instead of the traditional practice to give the government of the day the money so that they can administer the project, the UK government passed those monies to PAHO WHO for implementation. And it shows the confidence that they had in that government. And so, Mr. Speaker, under the Smart Hospital Project, we have already completed the Diamond Hospital, which we will reopen sometime later this month. And Mr. Speaker, we are also going to work and try to finish the other hospitals, which include Lenora, Mabaruma, and Letem hospitals. And we are also going to complete the health center at Paramakotai. This is what progress looks like, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in improving the well-being of mothers, we expect to strengthen the maternity infrastructure across this country. A new maternity home will be opened within months at Lethem. And we are also going to improve and open a new maternity ward at the New Amsterdam Hospital later in this year. And we are also going to build maternity waiting homes at Keto and Maruka. And yes, Mr. Speaker, we had a very unfortunate death at the New Amsterdam Hospital. And already, Mr. Speaker, we have sent an investigation team, and they went there yesterday, and they have completed an investigation. And when I get those recommendations, we will take actions against the nurses and the doctors and whoever is at fault in that unfortunate death. Mr. Speaker, in the past, we had a very successful pediatric cardiac program at the Georgetown Public Hospital, and we were able to do more than 100 cases at the hospital. This program that would normally help the children of this country was dismantled by this government. And over the past 2 years, Mr. Speaker, we were only able to send about 5 children for cardiac care abroad. And for each child that we have to send to Canada or the US to operate, to get their operations, it would cost about $30,000 to $50,000 US. They sent in the last 2 years 5 children. 1 went to the US and 3 went to Cuba. There's a backlog of cases, and a preliminary analysis, Mr. Speaker, would show that we have nearly 130 children waiting for surgery. That is why, Mr. Speaker, in this year's budget, we have allocated monies to buy all the necessary equipment and to pay the surgeons to come back to Guyana so that we can restart the pediatric cardiology program.
So that you can restart your presentation, you'll need an extension.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask for the honourable member to be given 5 minutes to conclude his excellent presentation.
Thank you, Honourable Member, Mr. Shearer. Honourable Minister, you may continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many, many other things that I can talk about. We can talk about the successes that we are getting in terms of reducing the burden of infectious diseases. We can talk about the work that we have started doing in chronic non-communicable diseases, which also include developing a new oncology program so that we can treat those patients. Mr. Speaker, you know, within these couple months, we have been able to work with a team in the ministry and with our external stakeholders to put together a new vision, a new strategy for health in Guyana that goes from 2021 to 2030. And not only that, Mr. Speaker, we have completed a new HIV plan. And in that plan, we are going to roll out comprehensive PrEP, and we are also going to do self-testing. And I can go on with the many things that we have done and that we will be doing. But, Mr. Speaker, since there have been a clamor for me to talk about COVID-19, I'll now turn my attention to COVID-19. We have heard many of the speakers here, the honorable members on the other side, they came here and they said that we on this side did not have a plan for COVID-19. And if you examine what they did after our first case on the 11th of March, 2020, if they were so effective and if they had such a good plan, then after we had the first case and the first death, then they would have been able to do all the contact tracing and we would have liquidated COVID-19 from Guyana. But the truth was that they were in shambles. They didn't know what to do. And so they were scrambling for a response. They were not able to do PCR testing. And so we had to build capacity in almost every area for the response. But now that we have completed that, we're now moving to the next stage of this response. And the next stage has to be the rollout of COVID-19 vaccines. Mr. Speaker, we were very grateful to the Prime Minister of Barbados and the people of Barbados for sending us 3,000 doses of the AstraZeneca vaccine. And as soon as we got it, the next day we were able to start rolling that out to our frontline health workers. And we have immunized workers in Region 4, 3, 2, 6, 5, 8, 9, and 1, and 7. All over we spread it out. And guess what, Mr. Speaker? Tomorrow morning, we'll be getting 20,000 more vaccines that are coming in, and we'll be using that to immunize our workers. And on the 8th of March, International Women's Day, we'll be getting 80,000 more vaccines for the people of this country. And later in the month, we'll be getting another 100,000 through the COVAX mechanism so that we can immunize our population. Mr. Speaker, if this is not a plan, then what else is a plan? This is what is going to get us out of COVID-19. And I want to thank the government of India, the government of China, the government of Barbados, and COVAX for providing us with vaccine so that we can protect the people of this country. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Minister of Health. It's my honor now to introduce and ask her to make her contribution, the Honorable Member, Ms. Catherine Hughes. Honorable Member, before you start, I just want members to know that the Honorable Member, Mr. Ford, had an average of about 85 decibel in the House, and Frank was enthusiastically, the Honorable Member, welcome, and he averaged about 90. Honorable Member, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What can I say about the last presenter? Let me say that he was like a pencil with absolutely no point. And I will deal with his points later on. Mr. Speaker, I wish to start by thanking the officers in our public service who have worked tirelessly to make this budget a reality. I wish to single out the members of the Ministry of Finance, our teachers, our frontline workers, our healthcare workers, and other Guyanese who have held this country together at this most difficult time. You are the salt of the earth, and we say to you, thank you. It is with great sadness, Mr. Speaker, that I stand here today as a member of the National Assembly of this honorable House. Sadness because, in all honesty, I cannot say that we have truly served the people of Guyana with all that has taken place in the last 7 days. I was thankful that in the early stages of this 12th Parliament, I was forced to be out of the jurisdiction and could attend virtually. It has been difficult to sit here and face the vitriol, the attacks on my sensibility, and the abuse that I have never received from any member of my family or close friend. We have been forced to drown in this madness in this very house. Mr. Speaker, you see, we come here to serve with the best of intentions. Each morning I come here, I tell myself, just ignore, just shut your mouth. And after the incessant bloodletting, I'm ashamed to say, I too find myself responding and becoming all that I despise about the way we're doing things in this parliament. A wise Martin Carter, who wrote 40 years ago, said, "We are all consumed." Mr. Speaker, the situation is made worse when some sections of our media refuse to provide a balanced report. That is one that can be deemed fair and objective, the tenets of any good journalist. Instead, what we got, in this case from Kaicho News, was a singling out of a series of comments with no response or no coverage of the words that facilitated, that initially brought and the retort and the reaction, invoked the reaction. Mr. Speaker, I don't need to tell the LGBTQ community in Guyana of my unwavering support to their right to choose and to enjoy all the basic rights. Lest we forget in 2006, when SASOD tried to host their very first Painting the Spectrum Film Festival, they came to me at Sidewalk Cafe, saying that nobody was willing to offer them a venue. Time, Mr. Speaker, does and reveals some interesting things. When the Minister of Education can stand here in her rant and say, "You have a friend in us," I want her to remember that it was her own colleague, the current minister with responsibility for public infrastructure, who actually, a man of the cloth, who had very different words to say, that's reported in Stabrook News, June 29, 2010. The interreligious organization yesterday accused SASOD of attempting to corrupt young minds in society by using gay and lesbian films to promote homosexuality. He said, gays and lesbians are internationally accepted and are allowed certain rights, even marriage. But that doesn't mean that Guyana has to submit to Western culture. Do not come to us in this house and think that you could speak when you have a big blob in your eye. I suggest you look in the mirror. Wikipedia states, and I quote,
Minister, I hear some words which I won't allow. Mr. McCoy, honorable member, please.
Mr. Speaker, as Wikipedia quotes, and I would like to quote, the then president of Guyana, Barra Jagdeo, of the People's Progressive Party, refused to sign the amendment bill. And I know you're asking what amendment bill. I want to remind you that in 2010, during the constitutional reform process, this parliament voted to outlaw discrimination on the grounds of sexual orientation. And I just gave you the word, I just gave you the quote of who refused to sign off on it. Now tell me, who can we trust? Who can trust what is said by this other side, who continuously try to repeat and to change history? Mr. Speaker, what comes to mind is the line in Jesus Christ Superstar, when Jesus Christ gets angry and he says, what is truth? Is it an unchanging law? What is truth? Is mine the same as yours? Mr. Speaker, regrettably, the absence of truth is displayed in the first line of the budget presentation when we're asked to accept a theme, a path to recovery, economic dynamism and resilience. Recovery, Mr. Speaker? Recovery from what? In September 2019, the IMF declares Guyana the fastest growing economy in the world. November 2nd, 2019, Bloomberg reports Guyana's GDP grew 14 times as fast as China's will in the next year, last year. CNBC, in the same month, Guyana's economy is projected to grow by 86% in 2020. Mr. Speaker, I would like to reference the press release of the International Monetary Fund, September 11, 2019. Guyana's economic growth strengthened in 2018, since 2018, with broad-based expansion across all major sectors. Real GDP grew by 4.1%, led by the construction and services industries. They go on to say economic growth is projected at 4.4% in 2019, all the same time when this APNU AFC government is in place. And guess what? They go on to say, the directors welcome Guyana's broad-based economic expansion in recent years, underpinned by prudent macroeconomic policies. Directors noted the midterm outlook is favorable. And guess what the IMF says about the National Resource Fund? Directors welcome the authorities' Natural Resource Fund legislation for managing Guyana's oil wealth and emphasize the need to complement it with fiscal responsibility framework to avoid fiscal deficits. They commended the NFS framework and explained that it aims to save some of the resource income for future generations so that future generations can manage public spending. That's the legislation we brought. So, Mr. Speaker, let's come closer to home. Let's see what the APNU AFC actually did for public servants in Guyana when we continue to ponder what public servants got. In 2014, the minimum wage was $20,000. In 2015, it increased to $39,500. Later in 2015, from $39,500 to $50,000, a 26% increase one time. It was not the usual 5% that the members on the other side of this House have a tradition of using. No, Mr. Speaker, from 2016, 50,000 to 55,000, 2017, 55,000 to 60,000, a 20% increase. 2018
Honourable Member, I'm just a little confused. There is the national minimum wage and the minimum wage in the public service. So I think there might be some synonymity.
I'm giving you the increases in minimum wage for the public service.
Thank you.
Which I mentioned before. In 2018, from 60,000 to 64,200. 2019, 64,200 to 70,000. We have a commitment, and every single year we made sure that the ordinary people of this country got an increase. So when the Honorable Minister of Health talks about unshackling the poor, we unshackle the poor. Mr. Speaker, this was no pre-election gimmick. Every year we ensured Guyanese had a little more. I think this is a good time to really look at some of the comments the previous speaker made. He talked about the sugar industry. The most disgraceful thing that he did this morning is to not mention the $300 million lost and squandered between 2008 and 2014. He refuses to accept that because of that, we had to start a process of diversification. When he talks about the hopelessness that pervades this land, let us say that is what's happening now. And then he talks about the reduction in VAT. I want to remind him that it was the PPP that first introduced VAT into the economy of Guyana, 16% VAT, and we started a process of slowly reducing it. And guess what? I asked him to show any items of food that have been reduced anytime VAT is reduced. So that is a fallacy. Now he talks about incomplete projects, and I really have too much to say to waste too much time on responding on that. But I do want to mention a few. The East Coast Road that we fixed, the East Bank Road, the Cato School that went over $1 billion thanks to the former and the current minister of Education, the Cheddi Jagan International Airport, which should have been done long ago. Let's talk about the building in High Street, a testimony to the reign of the PPP that stands there, unable to be used by any entity.
Honorable Member, I'll give you back your time. Honorable Member, Mr. McCoy, the list in front of you has guidance with respect to the kinds of words you can use in it.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Skeldon, the specialty hospital, the road to nowhere that was supposed to go to a hydro project. Mr. Speaker, what is even sad is that when the PPP government talks about corruption, and the minister, we just got a rant of that, the minister again ceases to mention his daughter's scholarship, paid for by taxpayer people in Guyana, and the printing of our poetry book. Folks, do not throw stones if you live in a glass house. Mr. Speaker, having not been invited to consult on this prior budget, I do want to take this opportunity nonetheless to add my plea to an increase in the private sector minimum wage. This is long overdue. Mr. Speaker, under the APNU AFC administration, pensions were increased, public assistance, as you know, VAT reduced, schools, hospitals, first oil, improvements on the transparency index, all of that. Mr. Speaker, at this point, for what it's worth, I want to thank Minister Jordan for his stewardship of the economy. The success of his performance is in the testimony of the international organizations I quoted and are forever written in history and in the sands of times. Former Minister Jordan, their attempts to jail you and destroy your good reputation will fail. For what is worth, I thank you on behalf of all Guyanese. I also apologize to the family, to his family, and many other families who have come to realize, as I was told recently, public service in Guyana is a burden and not the task that we all as Guyanese should be encouraged to bear. The constant assassination, verbal assassination of individuals and families and persons is totally unacceptable. Mr. Speaker, today governments all over the world are fighting to keep their economies intact and their citizens safe. It is unbelievable that the first 15 minutes, in fact, it was the last 5 minutes of his presentation, that the Minister of Finance mentions COVID and people's concerns. Maybe he has not seen the most recent post that is actually released today, which states that the Australian government has made a direct connection with HIV in some of the vaccines. They have now cancelled from a particular company making the vaccine all over 50,000 orders. The minister would have been better placed to come and explain to the people of Guyana how we are going to ensure that the vaccines we take are safe, given information like that in the public domain. Mr. Speaker, the current Minister of Health went on a rampage about having to use the specialty hospital, whether we like it or not. that hospital, that facility was rebuilt in record short time in haste to provide a safe space for these highly contagious COVID patients to be isolated and treated away from other patients in other hospitals. This facility is still the only one of its kind. And instead of bad-mouthing it, which he did, and cussing it up, the Minister of Health had to put his behind and use the same location. Mr. Speaker, I want the nation to know that when we set up the COVID task force, we deliberately invited the PPP to be part of that task force. That was because we knew that in an area of health and a pandemic of this nature, all Guyanese had to be on board working together. They chose not to participate in this task force. Mr. Speaker, if we were big enough, if we could be better and bigger persons, the PPP would have sat on that task force. So the contributions of all sides could be received and decisions made in the interest of all Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, the first months after August 2020, the numbers show we had a massive increase in the numbers and deaths especially. And more this continues. And now we have many countries not wanting citizens of Guyana to travel to their countries. We're on another list. Mr. Speaker, I want to turn to ICD development because I'm extremely proud of the success we had in those areas. We connected over 158 primary schools, 105 secondary schools, 30 technical and vocational institutes, opened 173 ICT community hubs in all regions, provided free internet to the regional democratic councils, the NDCs, internet to over 72 hinterland communities, smart classrooms, worked with agencies like PAHO with the smart hospitals. Yes, do a search of Google. Smart hospitals existed in Guyana prior to August 2020. Now, why am I saying all of this? I'm not tooting my own horn, but I'm saying to the government, I am raising those facts because I'm showing you that we left an excellent infrastructure in place that gave us an edge in these COVID times. Instead, the current government was totally lax and did not utilize the foundation, the infrastructure that existed to be able to ensure that more of our children could learn online. Mr. Speaker, it is an undisputed fact that far more approved educational and learning opportunities are available on the web. We should all be ashamed, including me, when we realize that online learning in Guyana can only and is only the purview of the folks that have. Yes, Mr. Speaker, the parents and guardians that can give their child a device, a computer, a laptop, who can probably afford Blaze, an internet plan of some sort, a data plan maybe, food to nourish the brains of their children, and a quiet corner at home to learn. Mr. Speaker, the have-nots, still a large percentage of our population, have nothing to get, nothing to learn, have lost a year of formal education. You see, Mr. Speaker, these are the forgotten ones whose parents Guyana failed more than 2 decades ago, between 1992 and 2015. Those were the children that went to schools that had a mere zinc sheet. And I traveled around enough in this country to be horrified at schools that have zinc sheets as the only roof, no insulation, and we expected them to learn in the midday sun. Many of those parents can't even help their children today. Mr. Speaker, in this budget, I am disappointed because there's no definitive statement or allocation for the have-nots of our society. How does a mother that can barely scrape together to purchase one device, decide which of her 3 children she's going to give the gift of education to. A gift that is guaranteed in our Constitution. What is even more worrying, Mr. Speaker, is the current Minister of Education came to this House speaking about increases in spending on janitorial supplies, up 26%, cleaning and extermination up 41%. Cleaning the schools is what the Ministry of Education is supposed to do. Mr. Speaker, we would have been encouraged if she came and explained an exciting project like the ones we see in Trinidad and in Jamaica, where children are being given their own device. Mr. Speaker, we changed the 1 laptop per family program to 1 laptop per teacher program so that teachers could prepare better for our school children. And as I said, more than 2 years ago, our intention was to ensure that every child gets a device. In a COVID-ridden world, that is the minimum that we can do. The vision to provide this. And if it does exist in any part of the budget, we're hoping we will hear in the wrap-up. Mr. Speaker, the current program of asking mommy and daddy or a guardian to collect a workbook, carry it back to school after completion, go at their own expense to go and pick it up, especially if they had been fired or have no job or little money. All this means is that the workbooks don't work. Mr. Speaker, many of us received complaints about the errors in the workbooks. And as far as I know, spell check is still just a click away on a computer. On a specific comprehension assignment, the animal deer, D-E-E-R, was spelled as D-E-A-R consistently. So how dare an official come to this House and say it is acceptable to put those kind of errors in books that you want our children to work from when your children have the luxury of private education. Mr. Speaker, I want you to know that the technology allows us to block any sites that persons might be worried about in terms of children accessing and using the facilities at the ICT hubs, at the schools or whatever. What we had expected, what I expected, was a program that would have shown that between the Ministry of Education and also the citizens in a community, a program to ensure that that free internet would be available, safe distancing protocols in place for our children to continue to learn. Mr. Speaker, in many parts of rural USA, children are also being given a portable Wi-Fi device. They're available on Amazon.com. And funding to expand our e-government network, which was established in 2015, although the technology and the project to launch it was signed since 2012, we were the ones that put it into being. And the facility exists to expand that same e-government network and to ensure that children, especially in vulnerable groups, at specific times, can get free internet from that same network. Mr. Speaker, these are some of the things that we know could have been new projects in this same budget. Mr. Speaker, the National Data Management Authority, as you know, is the agency that runs and manages and maintains the e-government network. And guess what? We cannot comprehend how a few weeks ago, The government of Guyana, this current government, chose to close all the community development and social management division. So all the representatives from communities that we carefully chose to manage these locations, those 72 locations that are specifically in the hinterland area that Minister Sukai seems to have forgotten exist. Those same locations where we found persons that had the skills to manage the technology, they were all sent home and the unit closed down. So when everybody else in the world is building their capacity, we are breaking it down, not using it and closing it. Mr. Speaker, we had two major projects. The Hinterland Poor and Remote Communities ICT Access Project, 17 million from the GRIF Fund, and also, as you know, the 37.5 million funds from the National Broadband Project. It is under these two projects that we were able to do and implement the massive expansion I mentioned earlier, never done before in the history of Guyana. What did we have before, Mr. Speaker? We had what we can define as the largest corruption scandal in the history of Guyana. A defunct fiber optic cable, monies used, no idea where the monies went, and not one service anywhere between Linden and Lethem that cable was supposed to provide. And here is the audit done by Raman McRae, who I know the current government have the utmost of confidence in them. The project was executed without appropriate project management documentation, including a project initiation document setting out a purpose, objective, scope, and deliverables. The total ICT project cost amounted to 13 billion, not million, folks, 13 billion in one side of the project, and then a further 2.9 billion. The budget was to be financed by central government, while 10 billion was budgeted to be financed from a loan. So you know, the ordinary people of Guyana are still paying for that. Yeah. And who was the project manager? Mr. Alexei Ramatar, project manager in the document.
Remember, I just cautioned the government side about naming people who can.
I withdraw that. The prominent son of a very prominent former president. And what did they say? No inventories. The listing provided by the project manager did not include costs. Most significant element, no inventory listing. And listen to the information on the banking. The honorable project manager, they put the name, so I got to take out the name. The project manager advised that he was never in possession of any bank statements, and no bank reconciliations were ever performed, even though the bank account was used on a regular basis to pay contractors. This appears to indicate that the control of funds was not considered a priority. Once again, who is this PPP government to talk to us about corruption?
Honorable member, you have to withdraw that one too. Corruption.
Apologies, Mr. Speaker. I withdraw.
An honorable member,
Mr. Speaker.
in order to continue, we will need an extension.
Thank you. Comrade Speaker, I do move that the honourable member be given 5 minutes to conclude her presentation.
Thank you, Honorable Chief Whip. Honorable member, you may
Mr.
continue
Speaker,
to conclude.
I know you're a fair person. I'm hoping that you did include my extra time that I lost.
Yes, you got an extra minute because you were supposed to get that notice at 11:56. You got it at 11:57. You're starting now at 11.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and members of this honorable House and people of Guyana, I have spoken about the smart classrooms. What I will say is do a Google search. Do a Google search. And I want to remind the Honorable Minister of Education that all the equipment for the hubs, for the smart classrooms I listed, arrived in Guyana prior to August 2020. If the Minister of Education is telling me and this Honorable House that for the last 6 months they do not have the capacity to implement and to set up the equipment, I am guilty. Mr. Speaker, I want to go to telecommunications. I stand proud of the foundation that we laid in liberalization. I compliment the Honorable Prime Minister for completing the process for the benefit of all Guyanese. But, Mr. Speaker, there's some questions that I need some answers to. Honorable Prime Minister, liberalization could never be simply the signing and assenting to parts of legislation that we did not bring to the House. Mr. Speaker, the current government concluded, firstly, did the current government conclude a settlement agreement with GT&T and its parent company, AT&I. It was a well-known fact that there were pending taxes and GRA assessments which suggested the company owed in excess of $48 million in taxes. Transparency and accountability are important. The people of Guyana want to know if that money was recovered. It is not seen in any parts of the budget. Mr. Speaker, if it was, we know that it should have been announced publicly as the law dictates. Then again, there were rights according to GT&T and AT&I. They assumed that the residual value was in excess of 100 million. And therefore, ending the monopoly, they assumed that there would be a payment for their loss of their time. Mr. Speaker, I will ask the Minister of Finance and the Honorable Prime Minister to explain whether an agreement was found on the value of that settlement. And of course, we want to know what were the agreements in terms of spectrum. Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, we want to know, we want to see the settlement agreement. Mr. Speaker, the people of Guyana will also remember that the APNU AFC government went to court to get the $5 million that was owed on the sale of shares to GT&T, which the previous government never collected. Again, we perused the estimates, and I don't see that in there. I'm happy, Mr. Speaker, that you are continuing with our two projects. Mr. Honorable Minister, Prime Minister, who telecommunications now falls, and I'm happy to see that VAT was removed on data services. Mr. Speaker, I want to mention in closing that a lot of talk has been said about rigging in this House. We have a particular other member of the cloth that has used the word riggers all the time. I want to remind the public and the people of this House, right, that we had an individual, a previous head of the Chief Elections Officer, a sheik of GCOM, who in 2011 manipulated the count. We seem to forget that. I sat at the Pegasus Hotel waiting for the results. And at the very last minute, we realized, thanks to the Honorable Mr. Vincent Alexander, that an extra seat was not to go to the PPP, but to the to the AFC. Since then, we know time is history. Mr. Speaker, it didn't stop there. In 2015, we had fake statement of polls. Is that possible? in the 2015 election? Yes, we remember that the security mark on those fake statement of polls finally came to the understanding of the people of Guyana. So, Mr. Speaker, again, don't talk to us about rigging.
Honorable.
Mr. Speaker, standing order 40. The matter that she refers to is sub judice. It was in the courts since 2015. Since 2015, Mr. Speaker, this is an issue that was brought to the court in 2015. The election petition by the PPPC has not been heard up to now.
Honorable Minister, thank you very much. Honorable Member, please, that matter is still sub judice. You need to withdraw those or we will strike them out.
Mr. Speaker, I'm speaking on the fact that we have individuals in this room that use the word rig. And I have specifically, if the people of Guyana remember anything,
you
they
were
must
almost at the
remember
end of your presentation. So if you want to
Mr.
use
Speaker,
a few more seconds to do that.
Mr. Speaker, the constant severing of jobs by persons in this administration continue to create and support the perception that a particular race in this country is being targeted. Mr. Speaker, I want to say that like JFK said, both sides need to start exploring what problems unite us instead of belaboring the problems that divide us. Mr. Speaker, this country is my country too. My grandfather was part of the team that went to London to speak on our independence. My great aunt's music is in the tapestry of
Could
Guyana.
you cut the microphone, please?
Guyana.
Your time is up. Honorable members, I think this is a good time to take the suspension.
We are a peaceful people. Struggle is we struggle, and we don't look for trouble. Just ask around. But when outside faces from foreign places talk